G'day mates, it's Busta here. So before the video begins, I just wanted to let you all know that I'm going to return to the long form content again. This means I'll be posting 1 or 2 longer videos a week with a compilation of true scary stories being featured. The reason for this is that, through my assessments, I found that the longer you guys watch, the better the channel does. Plus, regardless of YouTube's algorithm, I don't want to lose my roots. This channel was built because of what we have here, and I don't want to lose that, for anything, even if it means taking a hit from the algorithm. So, if you want to support this channel and if you want to help this channel grow, please be sure to watch this video all the way through and feel free to go and watch more of my videos straight after this one to help out if you wish. Also, I've decided that I'm going to take my series stories over to Twitch permanently to diversify a little. So if you would like to listen to the series stories, please open a tab in your window by right-clicking the link to my Twitch account in the description below and hit the follow button to be notified of when I'm live streaming and when new videos are out. It's completely free to follow and make an account too. I also will likely be doing a scary story night live stream there too, where I'll be listening to stories, talking and having a nice night with all of you guys once a week. And if this sounds like something you would enjoy, be sure to follow me on Twitch. And finally guys, I want to do more subscriber stories and less Reddit stories moving forward. So if you want the chance to have your story featured on the channel, please send it through to my email, which is also in the description below. Thank you guys so much for all of your support. I hope you enjoy the video, and without further ado, let's begin. I grew up in an okay part of town. My mum didn't work and my siblings and I are all around the same age. One morning, we were all getting ready for school and I stepped on some glass. I was going to make everyone else late. I couldn't find the band-aids and whatnot. My dad took my siblings to school and I got to stay home. Score. My mum and aunt went shopping and I had the whole house to myself. I was about 13 and honestly, I didn't even think of dangerous things happening. I sat outside for some time in the yard, playing with our cat and reading a book. I grew bored eventually and went inside. I was watching TV and I noticed a man creeping into the window. When I jumped up, he looked scared, but then he knocked. I know this is stupid, but I thought since he knocked and didn't run away, it was cool. He asked me about a beat-up car in the driveway. I told him I would let my dad know that he was interested. Looking back now, I realized that he was trying to figure out if I was home alone or not. I shrugged it off though, and continued watching TV. About an hour later, I heard someone trying to open the kitchen door. I got a little spooked and moved into an adjacent room that had glass doors connecting to the yard. I heard a window being rattled with. Then I heard the glass door next to me being tampered with. I was so scared that I couldn't even breathe. Looking back on it gives me chills, knowing the sheer terror I felt before possibly being attacked. After the glass door had been fucked with for a while, I heard a tiny bathroom window being messed with. The bathroom window was never locked, it was high up and took some effort to reach. I took this as my opportunity to get the fuck out of there. I ran out of the front door and started screaming about having a gun and a camera in the house. I got to my neighbor's house and waited for my parents. My family asked the entire block if anyone had seen anything suspicious, and no one had seen anything. Needless to say, I was scared, and I still hate being home alone. So just as some background, I'm a male and currently 25, and still living within 15 miles of my old house. This happened when I was about 8 or 9, making my sister at the time 5 or 6. We lived in a quiet neighborhood that, once I grew up, I found out was actually a lower income part of town. However, we had some wonderful neighbors and it was thanks to these neighbors that a lot of potentially negative situations were avoided. At the time, my dad was working an 8 AM to 8 PM job, and my mother was a secretary at a hospital, which meant that during the day, she was often at work. Usually my sister and I had a babysitter, but once I reached about 8 or 9, I was old enough to look out for us without a babysitter. Now mind you, this was the 90s, which certainly were not safe, but were much safer than they are now. Also, we had the previously mentioned neighbours, who generally did a good job of keeping an eye out for us in our house. This particular incident was one of the first times I was charged to babysit my sister. She was in her high chair eating whatever my mum had left for us when I got a knock on our front door. Now this was strange since we never got visitors on a regular basis, other than the boy across the street who would want us to come out and play, but he usually just yelled my name while knocking. I was young and naive and decided to open the door. There was a locked screen door behind that. I left that closed and locked. Outside was a middle-aged man. I hardly remember his facial features or even body type, but I do remember his yellow t-shirt and dirty jeans. Can I help you?" I asked innocently, no alarm bells going off yet. "Hey there, are your parents home?" Alright, first alarm bell. My parents teaching me not to trust strangers rushed through my head, but I still didn't quite fully grasp the potential danger here. My mum went to the store and she'll be back in a minute." It was a weird half lie. I could have said that she was here but in the shower, or that she was laying down upstairs or something. I'm glad I didn't tell him that she wouldn't be back for quite a few hours though. But looking back, it's scary how naive I was. "Well, that's no problem. So, my dog went missing and I think it went into your backyard. Do you mind if I come in and we can go check it out?" Okay, so I may have been dumb, but I wasn't that dumb. There was no way in hell I was letting this stranger into my house, especially with my sister there. She was my first thought. Sure, I didn't want to have any harm fall on me, but she was my sister and it was my job to keep her safe. I should have closed the door right then and there. But once again, I went with the less safe but still not totally stupid route. "Well, the gate should be unlocked. If you want to go and check the backyard, you can." And promptly closed the door. Now, of course, I was really curious if there was a stray dog in my backyard. Even with the weird guy being around, I was pretty interested to see how his search in the backyard went. So I decided to go and check the back window and see if there actually was a dog, and if so, if the man would catch it. Now at this point, I'm sure you have figured out that there was no dog. And when I looked out the back window, I could see almost the entire yard, including the gate. The man wasn't there. This was mere seconds after I had closed the door on him. I waited for a few minutes, but he never showed up. After about 5 minutes, there was another knock on my door. This time, I was much more wary, and I didn't like this guy showing up. I was pretty tired of the whole ordeal, but I still hadn't fully grasped the situation. I kept the chain lock on the door and cracked it open. "Did you find your dog?" Again, I can't remember his facial features, so I really cannot recall his expression, but I remember his tone was a bit desperate as well as annoyed. "No, I looked all over the yard and I couldn't find him. Look, I have a picture in my car if you want to take it, just in case you see him." Nope, no more. I still didn't understand abduction, but I certainly wasn't going to go anywhere outside of the house with this stranger. I told him that he can leave a picture in the mailbox and we'll keep an eye out, once again, promptly closing the door. What followed though is what really creeps me out about this day. Looking back, I was freaked out that I had come that close to exposing my sister and myself to some serious danger, and this scares the shit out of me. Suddenly, there was more knocking on my door. Not the screen door separating the door itself. Like I mentioned previously, the screen door was locked, and unless that was open, it was impossible to knock on the door itself. It freaked me the fuck out, and I took my sister to my bedroom and crept back out to the kitchen. It was where I could see out into the front yard, and I saw the man quickly getting back into his car while my saint of a next-door neighbor, Joan, stood on her front lawn smoking and watching him intently. It took a long time for me to add it all up, and honestly, I had forgotten about it for a long time, when finally I remembered it all. I'm still debating with myself to actually tell my parents now. I wouldn't want to unnecessarily upset them, but maybe it's an important story to tell to my two younger sisters, one of whom is getting married soon, just as a life lesson. If anyone has any advice, I would love to hear it. I saw something last night, and I'm terrified that I might relive it tonight. My girlfriend was in a car accident a few days ago, so she has been sleeping on the couch with her heating pad, and I have had the bed to myself. I am a regular drinker, but last night at about 10 p.m, I went to bed after having zero alcohol or any other substance. I laid in bed browsing Reddit, and it got to be late, and I was thinking about turning the light off, which late at night means the salt lamp on the table next to the bed. I reached over, but as I did, I got this really strong feeling that I wasn't alone. I haven't ever been afraid of the dark, but shadows and open doors have always made me mildly uncomfortable. The laundry room is in the bedroom, and the doors usually stay swung open because we're lazy. I turned the lamp up brighter to have a look around, and focused my gaze on the area of the laundry room. Very low to the ground, maybe a foot from the floor, was the head of an old woman. Not floating and disembodied, but craning out as if it was peeking out at me. She was smiling this crazy grin. I'm getting cold chills just thinking about this. And she just stared at me. I stared back for a bit, paralyzed, and I went to stand up. I didn't know why I decided to get up. I just knew that I didn't want to be in the same room as this thing while I was laying down in the bed. As I got up, I guess I broke eye contact or something, and when I regained focus, it had disappeared. I turned on all the lights, and there was nothing. Now, I am not a drug user, and I was not drunk. I was also not falling asleep. I don't know what to think about this, but I would like some advice or something. I have experienced potentially minor paranormal things in the past, but nothing I could ever see. Growing up, I lived in a small town an hour or so outside of a big city. It was quiet, many farms and a few nice cul-de-sacs with beautiful villas. There were 15 villas on the road that my parents bought a house on. I was 2 and had my very own room secured for future use. My big sister, Emily, got the larger room, of course. It was a 1-story house with a basement turned TV room, master bedroom and laundry room. But even though I was on the first floor, you couldn't see into the room without a chair or anything else to stand on. I felt really safe there. My room was located at the front of the house, window facing the front yard and street with only the staircase down to the basement separating it from the front door. Emily's room was facing the other way, with a window out towards the backyard. Under my window was a little patio with garden furniture, 2 chairs, sofa and table, where many summer days were spent eating ice cream. As the years went by, these furniture pieces came in handy for Emily, who had a bad habit of going to bed early and then sneaking out through her window to meet friends. As she couldn't get back in through her own window, she would bully me into keeping my window ajar so that she would be able to sneak back into my room when the time came and she felt ready to come home. I believe I was 13 and she was 16 at the time. I was a heavy sleeper, so it never really bothered me. I'd rather just stay out of all of it and turn a blind eye. One summer evening though, I did wake up when she finally came home. I could hear her fidgeting around outside on the patio. Tired as I was, I turned around and went back to sleep, and hearing my dad's heavy footsteps up the stairs from the master bedroom, I assumed a big row was about to take place, so I better stay out of it. But no argument came, and the shuffle outside stopped. Well, I drifted back to sleep, not thinking anything more about it. But what happened in the morning scares me to this day. My mum wakes me up to ask me if I heard anything out of the ordinary during the night. Not wanting to rat my sister out, I just said, no, why? She takes me to the patio, and on top of the white table are 2 massive, muddy footprints. Way too big to belong to a 16-year-old girl. After that night, I never left my window open again, angry sister or not. I did not want to meet the man who was stood outside my window in the middle of the night. I can only assume that my dad's nightly cigarette on the back porch scared him off, and I am incredibly thankful for that. I've been reading through these stories and remembered something that happened to my sister and I when we were younger. So, for some backstory, my sister and I were born prematurely. We're fraternal twins, and we've always been really small. While I was more physically sickly than my sister, she was born with autism. I think due to these ailments brought upon by our circumstances at birth, my mother was very overprotective of us. We had a rocky start. My biological father was a nutcase, so after my mum escaped with us from him, we moved around a lot. By the time I was 5, I think, we settled down in our own house with a shiny new dad. Things were great. We lived in a very rural town and all the neighbours were really friendly. Now, due to my mum's paranoia, she absolutely hammered her fears into her children. We were barely allowed into our backyard, which has a 6-foot-tall chain-link fence. When we figured out how to ride our bikes some years later, we could only ride about 3 houses down in either direction while she watched from the front lawn. So, while we were able to play outside, we never felt free to play, if that makes any sense. I guess after so long, my mum knew enough of the neighbours that if they saw us, they'd call out to her and say, "Your daughters just went past my house." So she let us have a 3-block radius to ride our bikes. It was so liberating. We laughed a lot, ran amok, and we really felt like little rebels. We didn't know Mum had neighbourhood eyes watching us everywhere we went, but it was still really fun. So it was getting late one day, close to sunset, when I decided it was time to head home. We were at our 3rd block limit, and I was afraid of the dark. I think we had to be about 12 years old, but because we were so small, we looked like we were 8 or 9 maybe. We had stopped at a stop sign and were chatting about nonsense when a white van pulled up. A man and a woman smiled at us, and the woman leant forward. "Hi girls, we lost our puppy. Could you help us find him? We're so worried about him." My mum's warnings surged into my head, and I remember kind of freezing. My sister looked at me, almost in tears about the puppy. Her autism made her an easy target for people, and I was having none of that today. I kind of politely declined and said, "Come on sister, let's go." But the people started to yell after us as we pedaled away. My sister was sobbing and pissed off at me, but she didn't go anywhere without me, and when we got home, I ushered us inside. I told my mother everything in a shaky voice, and she told us that we did well. To this day, I don't know if these people were trying to take us, or if they really were looking for a lost dog, but the fact that they yelled at us as we were pedaling away and were in a creepy white van creeps me out to this day. So, before we start, some background. I have a group of friends who I've been friends with pretty much since I was in kindergarten. There's 4 of us, which means me and 3 more guys. We are all 29 or 30 at the time of writing, and we're 28 to 29 at the time the event actually happened. We are all really close, even though ever since college, we met up pretty rarely. All of us were on long-lasting and steady relationships, either married or the modern equivalent, except for the main subject in this story, who had just come out of a pretty messy divorce. This friend, whose name is Andy, he had been having a really rough time, as his ex-wife decided to leave him right as his mother was dying of cancer, so it was understandable that we were all a bit worried about him. So, one of my friends has a pretty nice country house that's away from civilization enough to allow for a nice weekend retreat every once in a while. And at the start of this story, we had one of those scheduled. The week before, as we were all planning our retreat, Andy decided that he wasn't going because he didn't want to be the only one there without a partner for the entire weekend. We all insisted a bit, but we kind of understood the feeling, and since he had another event to go to during the weekend, we left it alone. Still, I wasn't really satisfied with that, as I felt that he could really use the change of scenery. So I decided that I'd give him a call Saturday morning, right before I left to the country house, offer him a ride and give him one last chance to show up. I called him from the door of my house and he sounded kind of weird on the phone, like he was sluggish or something. I even joked with him about it, since it was kind of early Saturday, and so I just assumed I had woken him up or something. He didn't laugh or anything, so I thought he was pissed. When I offered to pick him up and give him a ride, he simply replied with, "Okay." I told him to pack a change of clothes and meet me in the front of his house, and so we were gone. It was me, the wife, and him in the car for a nice 45-minute drive. I started noticing things were off just as he got into the car. He was acting really stupid. I have no other way to put this. He didn't get any jokes, had trouble understanding simple questions, and kept replying either with a simple yes or no, or with a really slurred short phrase at the most. At this point, my wife and I had all the reason to be worried about him, and we started thinking maybe he'd evolved into some weird form of depression or started doing drugs or something. But he refused to acknowledge anything was wrong with him, and so we simply drove on, hoping that maybe he'd open up later on. So, we all arrived. There was food and drinks and video games. Yes, we get away from civilization to play video games. And we were all friends again, so lots of fun was to be had. It quickly became obvious to all of us that Andy wasn't acting alright though. He wasn't playing any games, wasn't talking at all, spending most of the time just looking at us or at the outside. He'd have a look of marvel on his face, as if he was watching something really impressive unfolding. As time went on, I noticed he wasn't eating or drinking anything at all, and one of the guys swears that he kept tabs and Andy never went to the bathroom at all for the entire stay. We tried to get him to talk, but he just gave the exact same response every time. "I'm okay." He ended up winning the patience game, and so we just left him to his own devices. The night went on and he sat on a bench outside, looking at a stretch of woods near the house. We stayed indoors talking and stuff, and then we decided to go to sleep. Andy said he would go soon. He just wanted to chill for a bit outside. We all let him be. The next morning, late Sunday morning, his bed wasn't made. The sheets were intact on top of it. He was sitting outside in the exact same place we left him, in the exact same position. Well, that was it. I was completely freaked out and decided that it was time to go back home. We packed our stuff and said our goodbyes. Everyone was really worried about him, but we all felt really creeped out. So we just called it a weekend and left. I drove him home, dropped him off, and went home myself. Later that night, we ended up all meeting each other again in a restaurant for a birthday get-together of a common friend. I noticed Andy was himself again, and my other two friends looked really puzzled too. So I sat down and asked him, "What the fuck happened yesterday, man?" He replied with, "Yeah, my car broke down, and Peter here had to pick me up in the middle of the night after the bar." Well, that made no sense, and so we all started asking questions and trying to puzzle it all back. It turns out that he was at the bar with a couple of other guys at the same time that he was with us at the country house. When we kept insisting, in a kind of panic, that that was impossible, multiple people showed us pictures of him at said event. There were fucking pictures. So we all freaked out, and noticing that we weren't joking, Andy freaked out as well. We confirmed via phone history that his phone in fact got my call on Saturday morning, but he doesn't remember answering it. After this, the talk did continue, but we really couldn't understand it, and that was it. As the months passed by, the three of us all got really afraid of Andy and who he could be. We still have no idea of who was with us at the house, and Andy has gotten really sick of hearing about this, to the point of getting really mad when the subject comes up. He says the most rational explanation is that we all got confused and thought this up. I'm still nervous about this to this day, especially because I dropped him off at his house and saw him enter. Where the fuck did fake Andy go? Did he do anything while we were all asleep? Have any of you guys heard anything like this before? I've asked around and nothing really fits. I'm not really a believer in paranormal things, but I have no other explanation. I felt like I needed to share this, to maybe just get it off my chest, as the other guys and my wife don't like talking about it, because it gets everyone really nervous. I grew up in Wolverhampton in the West Midlands of the UK. I was 12 years old and let's just say I didn't have the easiest of upbringings. I was smoking, drinking, and staying out late around this time of my life. So I was bunking off of school. My mum was at work and it was late morning time, around 11 a.m. I wanted to buy some cigarettes, but as I was well under the legal age was 16 at this time, I had to hang around outside the shop and ask strangers if they could take my money and purchase them for me. About 1.5 miles from my house, there was a little shop called The Spa. It was on a fairly busy road. A row of hedges lined one side, with a gap that led into the field beyond, and houses on the opposite side. So I was standing maybe 20 paces from the shop, waiting for people to walk past so that I could ask them to purchase my cigarettes. I usually second-guessed if they would be willing by how they looked. I asked a lady, maybe mid-40s, shoulder-length hair, black business trousers, pink elbow-length jumper, looked like she smoked, and she said no. I asked another guy, maybe mid-50s, shaved brown hair. He was wearing blue jeans and a white t-shirt, and he ignored me. So I was getting desperate by this point, and decided upon asking anybody that came by. So I'm standing there and I see a rather disheveled looking man coming up the road towards me past the row of hedges. He was wearing dirty dark brown suit trousers and a buttoned up dark brown dirty velvet jacket. He had a black bowler kind of hat on and he kind of limped a little as he walked. As he got closer to me and I was trying to suss out if he looked like the type that would possibly purchase a 12-year-old cigarettes, I noticed that he was probably homeless and possibly in his late 50s, early 60s. But I thought, he probably smokes and I'll just ask him. As he approached me, I gave him the usual line. Excuse me, mate. Could you please go into the shop and get some fags for me? He stopped and thought for a second, then said, How old are you? I lied. I'm 15, almost 16. Then he said, Alright, which ones do you want? And held out a really dirty hand. I gave him my money and asked him to get me 10 sovereign. I had the exact change. He goes into the shop and I'm waiting outside, excited. I'm finally getting my cigarettes and can go home and chill out before I have to leave the house again to make it look like I've just got home from school. He comes out and gives me 20 sovereign. I'm miffed to say the least, and say, But I only gave you enough money for 10. And I start panicking because I don't have any extra money on me to give him. At this point, he hooks my arm into his, very tightly holding my arm firmly to his side, and starts to walk back towards the hedge-lined road. All the while, he's telling me how I can make up for not having the extra money for the cigarettes. I'm kind of stunned at this point, and my mind is blank. I guess I was in some kind of shock or something. He leads me through the gap in the hedges and into a field, all the while talking non-stop. Still briskly walking with my arm locked into his. He's telling me how I can come to his house and help him fix the roof tiles. I'm still in silent shock. The field is huge, and I can see it leads into more fields, and I can hear the cars behind me getting more and more distant. I can't see any houses for miles. There's just fields. He's still talking, but I'm not taking in what he's saying. My mind is racing. I finally realize that I just have to get away. As he is still walking, holding my arm, I suddenly and violently pull back with my arm straight. It slides my arm out of his very quickly and he goes flying forwards and lands in a heap on the floor, and I take one big step backwards. I'm terrified at this point, but still in shock, and I can't speak. He's laying on the ground, groaning, holding his leg like he's in a lot of pain. Why'd you do that for? You've really hurt me. Help me up. Help me up. He's holding his leg and holding his hand out for me to help him up. I'm frozen. My mind is racing so fast. I'm looking at this disheveled man right in the eye, laying on the ground, groaning like he is in pain. But something about this situation just didn't sit right with me. My gut was telling me to run. Don't help him up. I brought you those cigarettes, didn't I? I helped you out. Why'd you do this? You've hurt me. Help me up. I take another step backwards, all the while looking into his green eyes. All of a sudden, he stops groaning and asking for me to help him up. He points his finger at me, looking me right in the eyes, and says, "You're a smart one." It was like an electric shock ran through my body, and I turned and ran. I didn't look back, and I just ran as fast as I could. When I'd gotten off of the hedge-lined road and turned into the next road, I slowed as I was out of breath. I started bawling my eyes out, and I was shaking uncontrollably. I kept checking behind me, catching my breath, and didn't stop running until I got home. I guess it goes without saying that I was terrified that I'd bump into that man again, and I never, ever tried to buy cigarettes from that shop ever again. Pretty much anyone who lives in New York City is familiar with the free hug guys. They frequent parks and high tourist areas, holding up signs that say free hugs, and often charm tourists in. Most of them are very peaceful and friendly. They mean no harm and just want to spread the love. If you want a hug, they give you a hug and send you on your way. But if you don't wish to be hugged, then they wish you well and go on to offering hugs to others. However, about 2 years ago, I had a very frightening encounter with one who was far from peaceful. I live in Brooklyn and had gone to Union Square to meet my dad who was visiting from upstate. Seeing as how I'd arrived before him, I told him that I would meet him on the steps of the park when he arrived. Shortly after I sent my dad the text about my location, I was approached by a free hugs guy, who of course was offering me a free hug. Now, being a petite young woman living in a large city, I tend to ignore random men who stop me on the streets to talk to me. Like many women in the city, I've faced a lot of aggressive catcalling, and that has made me very cautious about such interactions. Plus, I just really do not like being hugged by strangers. So, I politely declined his hug and wished him a nice day, thinking he would just move on to the next person. A few moments later, I noticed that he was still staring at me, so I got up and moved. He followed me though, and asked me why I didn't want a hug from him. I was a bit weirded out as I had never seen any of the free hugs guys act so persistent. So I politely explained that it was nothing against him, but I just didn't like to be touched by strangers. I thought that that would be enough as I was not rude to him in the least, but even so, I started to head out of the park. And he followed me, demanding that I hug him. Having had enough at this point, I said that I didn't mind him offering hugs, but the fact that he was following me was starting to creep me out. This caused him to explode at me and start cussing. He said that if I didn't leave the park immediately, he would punch me in the face. I started running, but he still followed me, threatening me. I was looking for the police, but oddly, this was the one time that there weren't any NYPD present in Union Square. Thankfully, I made it into a Starbucks, and he didn't follow me inside. I told my dad about what happened, but by the time he arrived, free hugs guy was gone. Ever since that event, I've been very cautious about going into Union Square Park, or any similar place, alone. Thankfully, it seems this particular free hugs guy was arrested last year, after he actually did punch a woman in the face. He apparently had a history of becoming aggressive, following women, and threatening them. But this is New York City, so I don't know if he's back out there offering hugs, but threatening to punch people who refuse them. Back in the 8th grade, probably halfway through the school year, I received a phone call from an unknown caller. Usually, I would not answer a number I didn't recognize, or sometimes I would do so in an accent, but I would always hang up after a second or two. Things changed, however, when the second I answered, I heard a man say my full name in a questioning tone, like as if he was asking for confirmation that it was me. Being just a kid and thinking that this was one of my parents' friends or someone who I could talk to, I told him that it was me. That was a big mistake, but I didn't know at the time. That first call I don't remember much of, except that he hung up not long after I said that it was me. Some time passed, maybe less than a week, when I got an unknown call again. I didn't answer, and then I kept getting spam calls. So I finally answered, and this guy was asking me about what shows I like to watch. I got the idea that maybe I shouldn't be talking to this guy, so I just hung up. Not much longer, another couple of calls came in until I said to stop calling me, and he responded something to the effect of hanging up mid-conversation is rude. My dad heard me and asked who I was talking to, so I told him that I didn't know and handed him the phone. My dad asked who it was and to stop calling my number in his angry dad tone. Then he got a confused face for a second, before getting really angry and shouting at them before they abruptly hung up. My dad later told me that this person knew my father's name, Carlos, and had told him, "Don't be so angry, Carlos," before hanging up. Pretty soon, these calls would happen at least once a day, and I would almost always hand the phone to my dad for him to yell at the guy. We told all our friends and family to stop if they were prank calling me. We tried getting the police involved, and we also contacted my middle school saying that there was a guy being creepy with me. Strangely, the guy never called during school hours, and he would usually call first when I was home alone, but soon switched it up by calling around the time my father got home from work. This guy sounded young too. For a long time, we thought my uncles or their friends were playing a prank on us. He sounded maybe in his late 20s, and sounded sort of Latino. He never had an angry tone and never said anything malicious. But he was a stalker, and he knew the names of my parents, sisters, my dogs, some cousins, and my grandparents. He never called when we had company over, and it was never after like 8 p.m. At one point, I was sitting in my room and got a call. By this point, it was nearing the last few weeks of school, and because this guy never said anything bad, and the police said that there was nothing that they could do, I just answered the phone and asked what he wanted. I remember, clear as day, he was listing off video games. He said Red Dead Redemption, Modern Warfare 2, Halo 3, etc. I looked to my disc stand and saw that he was reading off the list order of my games that were in there, top to bottom. I stood up and looked out the window, but nobody was there. After the list was done, I just stood there, and he told me something about me having good taste in games and that we should play sometime. At this moment, I was scared shitless. I cried and called my dad. He came home early and we realized, like idiots, that we could just change my number. We changed my number and I purged my Facebook account, and we all set our accounts to private. Maybe 6 months later, we moved, and after changing the number, I never got any calls from this guy again. The reason I tell this story is because I've been getting unknown numbers calling me for the past couple of days again. I never answer them anymore, but telling my girlfriend about it, she reminded me about this guy. So, I'll be changing my number soon as a precaution, but I can't help but wonder if this is the same guy, and if so, how did he get my number again? Throughout my life, I've experienced many unusual and often unpleasant situations. For privacy reasons, I don't want to give away too much information about myself, but I will say that I'm a 20-year-old girl now living in Ireland, where I have lived for over 5 years. I grew up in a small Eastern European country, of which about 40% are Russian, and am of Russian descent. Even though almost everyone in my country spoke fluent Russian and much of the population had Russian relatives, ethnic tensions in the country were high. It wasn't uncommon for you to receive a lower salary or worse treatment in shops and other public places if the place was run by natives. It is because of this, then, I believe I was singled out as a target in this particular story. That, and my feeble appearances, I've always been quite short and skinny. My neighborhood, like any other, consisted of many blocks of Soviet apartments, remnants of the USSR, rotting away but nevertheless housing hundreds of people. It was a good enough neighborhood, all things considered, and I would not call my family particularly poor. However, the building we lived in was rather bleak. The hallway was always dark, stank of piss or sometimes other bodily excretions. The building was quite tall and had an old creaky elevator which smelled no better than the hallway itself, and it often got stuck or broke. This, however, was still more favourable than climbing the even darker set of stairs, which often had homeless people sleeping on them, or groups of teenagers gathering to do drugs. The layout of the place is unimportant, but I believe that this description will set the scene. After a year or two of living in this building, with little occurrences aside from stumbling upon the occasional stoner, I started to notice two native kids hanging around the neighborhood, a girl and a boy. At first, they never spoke to me, and I paid little mind to them. However, I would often notice them staring at me as I passed by, or from a distance as I played with other neighborhood kids. These kids were weird, to say the least. They spoke a limited amount of Russian and isolated themselves from everyone else, just watching me. Despite them being very similar looking, nobody knew if they were related or just two weirdos living in my building who found each other, but I remember always assuming that they were brother and sister. After a while of the not-so-casual staring, they began to harass me on my walk home, tease me, push me, and generally attempt to get on my nerves with what little Russian insults they knew. I had a rather thick skin, so this didn't bother me too much. I would either completely ignore them or fight back with what I thought were rather witty comebacks. But these kids were relentless. I began to wonder why they decided to randomly pick on me, as I had never said a word to them before and had never really paid them any significant amount of attention, but decided to settle for the "they're just a bit weird" explanation. Nevertheless, this is all just teasing, right? Kids being kids. One day on my walk home, the strange duo were on my heels as usual, the boy making some crude comments about my nationality and how I should go back home to Russia, as well as other unrelated insults, while the girl snorted and laughed her ass off. I did my best to ignore their behaviour, not following in the mood to dignify them with a clever comeback this time. However, it became increasingly difficult, as, in frustration, the two suddenly became more aggressive than usual. All the other times this had went on, they would just give up and leave me alone after a while, walking in the other direction. But this time, to my surprise, they followed me into my building and into the poorly lit stinky hallway. Still ignoring them, I pressed the button for the elevator, when I felt the boy roughly grab me from behind. I was in shock. The girl then joined him, bending my arm in an incredibly uncomfortable position behind my back. "What the hell are you doing?" I screamed at them, as they began attempting to drag me into the almost black staircase, telling me to shut the fuck up. I struggled, of course, not understanding what had gotten into these two. I mean, I knew that they were weird, but this was something else. This didn't feel like childhood bullies or kids being kids anymore. I believe those two had something sinister on their minds. As I struggled against their grip, trying to break my way free towards the elevator that had now arrived onto the ground floor, a middle-aged woman walked into the hallway. There was a look of confusion on her face, and she asked, "Is anyone going up?" Desperately, I breathed, "I am. Please," reaching for the elevator, only to hear the guy snarl, "You're not going anywhere." To my surprise, despite the pure desperation in my voice, and the fact that I was fighting two seemingly older kids, due to my size, trying to drag me away, the woman didn't offer any help, didn't give out to the two kids, didn't even ask what the heck was going on, just shrugged her shoulders and walked into the elevator. What was going through her head still makes me curious, but I assumed that this was probably due to assuming this was nothing serious because of our age and all. Or maybe her not wanting to get involved any more than she already had in order to avoid trouble. After all, our neighborhood wasn't the safest, and it's best to just stay out of trouble if you can. At this point, I became surged with adrenaline, partly from my desire to get into that elevator and away from these two, and partly from anger at her refusal to help me. It's amazing what the human body can do when faced with a potential dangerous situation. Using all of my strength, I whipped around and slammed the boy harshly into the wall behind me, immediately making both the girl and the boy let go of me. I could tell that the two of them were as shocked as I was. As I said, I was a small girl, but it felt as though someone else had possessed me at that moment, as if I wasn't even in control of my actions. All I knew is that I had to get away. As soon as I was let go, I ran to the elevator and managed to make it inside before the door closed. The last thing I remember seeing before the door slammed shut and we took off was the girl's shocked expression as she stared at me, surprised of what I was capable of. The lady in the elevator didn't say a word to me, and I wish then I could say it ended there. A few days later, I was confident in my ability to defend myself against these two, and was pretty sure that they wouldn't attempt to attack me again, or even go near me. My relief, however, was short-lived. A friend of mine knocked on my door at the usual time I would go out on a free day, asking me to hang out. I, of course, excitedly agreed, and as soon as I was ready, we headed out to the elevator. As previously mentioned, the elevator itself was not all that sturdy and easily broke down, but that's not the only thing that made it extremely unsafe. If you were a child and were taking the elevator alone, especially in a building as tall as ours where there were many floors, you never knew what the person that got on with you turned out to be and what they could do to you, especially if the elevator suddenly got stuck. This wasn't something that happened so often that it prevented us from using it and taking the dreaded stairs, but still, it was always in the back of your mind. We got on without a worry in the world and pressed the button for the ground floor and began chatting about nothing in particular. About 4 floors down, the elevator stopped, letting on a burly middle-aged man. Just the sight of him was intimidating. He had a sunken face, long, black greasy hair, a curled beard, sweat stains under his arms, and his belly was so big that it took up most of the room in the tiny elevator, pushing my friend and I into a corner. We fell silent. At first, he said nothing, just stared at the two of us as the elevator doors closed. I could tell that much like myself, my friend had an uneasy feeling about him. Then, in a very deep, hoarse voice, he said slowly and calmly, "You think you're so tough, don't you?" It was more of a statement than a question, and I could tell it was directed at me. Suddenly, he pressed the elevator stop button, screeching it to a halt, reached out and grabbed me by my fringe. He pinned me against the wall of the elevator, still holding onto my fringe, and began to pull up. I could feel some strands of my hair ripping out of my skull as I was being lifted slightly, but it wasn't enough for my feet to lose contact with the ground. I squealed in pain as my friend watched in shock, cowering further into the corner, unable to do anything. "I can be tough too," he sneered in a slightly sarcastic tone. I began to try to make him to let go of my hair, but it was to no avail. The more I moved, the more of my fringe ripped out, and the more painful it became. So I just stopped struggling and attempted to stand up on my tippy toes as much as I could to release the tension he put on my hair. "You think it's so funny to hurt my son?" For a second, I had no idea what he was on about, but then I realized. The boy I had slammed against the wall in an attempt to get away must have told his parents what happened, most likely neglecting to include the fact that he attacked me first. Or maybe he did, and his father just didn't give a shit. He didn't seem like a very reasonable man after all. "I know what floor you live on. If you ever touch my son again, I will put a knife through your throat in this fucking elevator. Do you understand me?" He hissed at me. Before I could respond, the elevator began to move again. Someone must have called it to another floor. He narrowed his eyes at me and let go of my hair, standing back and acting as if nothing happened as we stopped and another person got on a few floors down. The rest of the ride down was spent in silence. Honestly, I don't know what was scarier. The fact that this clearly insane man was threatening my life, or the fact that his equally loopy son stalked me without my knowledge to find out what floor I lived on, and what my routine was so that he could get his psycho dad to threaten me. And for what? My friend and I tried not to speak about it again, but whenever I saw those two kids again, they just kept their distance as they had before, grinning at me.